Go ahead.
Okay, this is the June 27th meeting of the Charles County Charter Board. Our guests tonight are going to be Doug Duncan and Mac Middleton. Mr. Duncan came down from Montgomery County, and he will be first, and Mac is graciously going to wait his turn.
Even though I got here first.
Yes.
I was here at 5:30.
I want to preface the meeting by, for those members of the public who haven't seen any of these meetings, the Charter Board was formed by the Charles County Commissioners. It is a Maryland constitutional entity. There are 9 of us. We are your fellow citizens. We are registered voters, and our task is to write a charter. We're not here to decide whether or not to write one. The commissioners, by forming the charter, made the decision that a charter should be presented to the voters for a referendum. Our task is to reach a consensus on what would be a good charter, a good government for Charles County. And what we are now in is what I would call the exploratory stage, where we are talking to individuals to advise us of what works and doesn't work from their point of view with regard to local government. And keeping that in mind, one last thing as far as our independence goes, we hope that the 9 of us will agree on a charter, but we are all we are free to disagree, and if if one of the board members doesn't think that the charter is a good idea, certainly that member of the Charter Board can actively voice his or her concerns when it comes time for this to go to referendum. Lastly, I would suggest that we've heard from some people about what are good ideas, and we think we've heard some pitfalls that other counties have had. At this point, we are open to ideas, good ideas, and if they're bad ideas, we want to hear what the weaknesses are in those ideas. That's the process that we're in today. None of us are beholden to any specific group. As far as I know, none of us were interviewed before we were appointed. We each got a letter saying that we each filed an application, and each of us got a letter saying we had been chosen. I think we represent a cross-section of the county, and we're just going to try to form a collective judgment as to what would be best for the county. Keeping that in mind, Doug Duncan was a county exec in Montgomery County, which is obviously much larger than Charles, and he was county exec for 12 years. Some of the issues that we are interested in, and I'll pass my list over to you, is we're concerned about the cost of a county executive. If Charter Board doesn't have to have a county executive, we could have a county manager. I believe we could skip it. We could have neither if that's what we decided, but we're concerned if we have a county exec, what about duplicating staffs? If we have a county council, what's an appropriate size? We have about 150,000 people living in the county now. Should council people, what's been your experience with council people who are at large and those who are elected by district? I expect someone may ask you about term limits, what your feelings are about that. We're concerned about, we've talked about checks and balances. That is, what controls will there be to limit the powers of both the council and the county exec? And that would be with regard, for instance, to appointments to the various boards, and also with regard to a budget process. And if you can give us some idea of what you think are the stronger points or the weaker points of that. With regard to school board, we've had discussions about the school board. 3/4 of the county budget of the Charles County budget is devoted to the school board and the sheriff's office. We know that, and some of us have read that in Prince George's County there's been a readjustment of the relationship between the county exec and the school board. We have an elected school board here. if you have some insights with regard to that, we would appreciate that. With regard to a police department, we know Montgomery County has a police department. If you have some insights with regard to that as well. That's the short list. And if you,
Sum it up in 2 minutes, right?
after you've done that, we'll have questions that I forgot to mention.
Great.
Go.
Len, thank you very much for inviting me. I really appreciate it, and it's always a privilege to be here with Senator Milton. I'm a big fan of his, and loved working with him when I was county executive. I am here as an unabashed supporter of county executive government. I love being county executive. I've loved it so much that I'm running for it again next year. And let me just give you a little history of Montgomery County. We had commissioners, I think, don't hold me on these dates, but pretty much till right after World War II. Then we switched to a council manager form of government. And then 1970, we elected our first county executive. And the reason we went from council manager to executive was, the reason we went from commissioner to council manager was we wanted to sort of, post-World War II, bring a level of professionalism in management, county management to the county. The reason we went from council manager to executive is that the feeling that the county manager was unaccountable. That if there were problems with what they were doing, no one other than the county council could sort of rein him or her in or control him or her. And they felt that if there's an elected top official for the county, that the voters can say yes or no, we like what you're doing, and they really had no say in terms of the county manager. I would, you talked about you could do council manager, go to county executive, or do neither. I would recommend you sort of skip the council manager and you go directly to a county executive, because I think that accountability is very important for the public. One of the big criticisms that we had at the time when we shifted to this form of government was the duplication, that there are a lot of county employees in particular who felt, we've got an executive, we're just sort of duplicating things on the council side, the executive side, it's a waste of money. Over time, my aunt who worked for solid waste in the county always told me that. But over time, that's sort of gotten out of the way. And it really depends on how you set the structure up. We have in Montgomery County what's called the council always reminded me of this, a weak executive form of government with the powers they had. And one of the challenges we had was in 1970, we had a county council that was elected that was all Democrat. And lo and behold, the executive was Republican, which surprised all the Democrats. And they spent the next 4 years basically trying to take away powers that had just been approved in the charter for the executive because he was from the wrong party. I mean, that's something you got to really be careful about. And there's sort of been a fight back and forth over who does what and how you control it. I mean, my sense is the county executive is the leader of the workforce of the great majority of the county employees. The county council does legislation, they do budget, they pass the budget, and that's really sort of about it. I mean, they represent the constituents and are advocates for the constituents, but legally that's their role, and the executive's role is to run the day-to-day operations of the government. Clearly you need some kind of manager to assist the executive. They're usually called chief administrative officers, at least in Maryland. And I think that's a good structure to take a look at. Let me see your list here. In terms of the county council, we had 7 for a long, long time. Then we shifted to 9. When we went to some district members, we shifted to 9. And I am a huge believer in you have to have some at-large members. What I've seen when you have councils that are all district members, that they become sort of lords in their district, and everyone sort of defers to them. So basically, I'll let you do whatever you want in your district as long as you let me do whatever I want in my district. And there's nobody, when you go to them for tough votes on things that you have to do, there's nobody looking out for the countywide perspective as a whole. So what we settled on in Montgomery was 4 at-large members and 5 district members. And clearly you could do 2 at-large, 3 district, you could do 3 at-large, 4 district, whatever number you think fits the population here. But I would recommend letting the voters vote for a majority of the county council, if that's what you choose. And that's what we do in Montgomery. You vote for 5 council members, the 4 at-large and your district member. And it is, I can't tell you how many times it was helpful to me as county executive to have council members who represented the entire county, and how easy it was to sort of work with them, because they could look beyond a very parochial issue. In terms of term limits, I don't, I do think that Prince George's term limits hurts them, their local term limits, that as soon as the executive enters the first day of his or her second term there, they're already talking about who's going to replace them. The county council, I mean, we've seen this where people will be elected to their second term and they will leave 2 years before because they're worried about getting a job when their term expires. So they'll find something and just walk away. So I'm not I had sort of favored 3 terms at one point. Looking at it more, I think it's an issue that the voters can decide by re-electing someone or not, and you don't want to lose that continuity. I mean, there is something to be said for sort of institutional knowledge and how that builds up leadership. In terms of the budget, Montgomery County is different than the state and then other local governments with executive powers in Maryland, where I put the budget together, I submit it to the county council, they can take it and just throw it out and write their own budget. They can do it. It's sort of like Congress. They can do whatever they want with that. Whereas in other places, they can't increase the budget beyond what the governor or the mayor of Baltimore or the county executive has recommended. Some places that's the entire budget. Some places it's only county government, and the schools they can add, do whatever they want. That has led to some spending issues. I think 11 of the 12 years I was there, the county council increased the budget I submitted and spent more money. One challenge I faced was you sort of need to look at how you set your budget powers, because one challenge I faced was they would, let's say there was a $5 million allocation for X, and they would cut that and take that $5 million and spend it on whatever their priority was. And then they would tell whoever they cut, come back in July and we'll do a supplemental appropriation and give you the $5 million. So there's a little bit of budget gamesmanship going on. One way to avoid that is to not allow the council to exceed the executive's budget. I mean, that's something. Some days I would have loved to have had that power. Other days, I think it's good that you've got the council sort of weighing in and making their own decision on what we need to do with the budget. In terms of boards and commissions, it's, the executive gets the great majority of appointments. There are some particular boards or commissions where the council has their designated appointments. I think that's something that you can all work out. To me, that's not a real big deal. Most of these boards and commissions sort of report to executive staff, or they don't report, they advise executive staff, and their advisors really to the county executive. So it makes sense for the county executive to have the appointment power there.
Could they veto?
Does who veto?
Could the council veto your?
Yes, those appointments are all sent to the county council for approval, so they can vote yes or no on those appointments. The other area I think you need to pay close attention to is how many employees can the county executive hire and fire at will. And Maryland's got far too many. I mean, thousands. And there's no, you get to a certain level, and there's no real control over that, and there should be sort of a merit system there. In Montgomery, we had basically, if you were department head, you could be appointed by the county executive, but anything below that, you couldn't. So what happened was we were just creating departments after departments, because that way you could appoint someone, and that was not good. So we created something, had a charter amendment passed by the voters. I guess question A is what it was called, but it basically allows the council to designate certain employees as appointable by the executive and confirmed by the council. And so now, instead of like 15 people, there's probably about 50 plus that the executive can appoint in Montgomery County. And the council kept their prerogative, making sure that they all had to be approved by them. The only employees that in Montgomery that the executive can hire without council approval there's 3 special assistants the executive gets. They're sort of political aides. They're whatever you want to call them. I think that's sort of standard there. The school board, Prince George's is going through a lot of we have an elected school board, they submit, the superintendent works with them for the budget, they approve a budget, they submit it to the executive, and then the executive submits it, makes changes, recommendations, whatever, submits it to the council. And that seems to work well. I like the fact we elected school board that was independent, that really focused on the needs of the kids. I also like the fact they did not have taxing authority, because we would not be able to fund anything else if they did. But I think there's a good check and balance there in terms of their ability to advocate for the schools and the students, and the ability of the executive and council to put that in perspective with the rest of the county needs.
Now, just in your particular situation, did the school board submit their budget to you, or,
Yes.
or one of your staff members, and you reviewed it?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
So they would give, the community college, the school system, park and planning, WSSC, the water sewer authority, police are part of the county government. They would submit the budget to the executive. I would compile all that together, make recommendations, changes, whatever. Again, in the school system, you've got state limits as to
Right.
what you can and cannot do, but within those limits, would make changes, and
So
then
within
submit
those-
that to the county council, and they would have the final
Okay.
say.
I just want to make sure, because it's a big issue. But so within those limits, you could decrease the school
Oh,
department
yes.
budget if
Yes.
you wish. Okay.
Yes. I could recommend to the council it be decreased.
And then the
Okay.
council
Or
decides.
increased.
Yeah, well, the whole budget is recommended to the council.
Yes,
Yeah, okay.
yes. Yeah, the executive has no final say on any budget
Right,
items.
right.
That's the council's prerogative, that's what they do, so. But yes, you can, within the state guidelines, state law, you can do different things to the school system budget.
And when you refer to Montgomery County as having a weak executive, the idea that and you mentioned other counties, when the executive proposes a budget, it cannot be increased.
That's right, that's right.
And I
Like the
understand-
governor of Maryland.
Yes.
Some of them, they can increase the school system budget.
And you mentioned that on occasion you wish that you had had that sort of say. In balance, which would you make a judgment as to which is preferable?
I do sort of, I'm probably unusual in the state. I do like the fact that the council can, do things, that the public can appeal to the council if the executive leaves something out. I would go along with that a lot more if we were able to get rid of the gamesmanship that goes on in terms of, we're going to cut this, and then a month later, we're going to fund it, and, we need some honesty in the budgeting process, and I think you've got to be careful of how you allow supplementals, how you do things, and how you do. We changed the charter because they were all called emergency appropriations. So anything after the budget was passed as emergency appropriation, it had to be recommended by the executive, or approved by the executive and the council together, and it really didn't make any sense. And we were sort of doing normal things you would do to respond to whatever, and they weren't really emergencies. So we changed it to supplemental, and then the council sort of, there was some period where they couldn't submit supplementals after the budget was passed, and then that all got wiped away, and then it just became, let's do whatever we
You
want.
made the point that if the executive left something out, but the council would have the authority to, without exceeding the budget, to move some funds over and put that in the budget. Is
They
that
could do
correct?
that, or they could exceed the budget that was submitted by the.
In Montgomery County, they could.
I don't know, in other counties, I don't know if you, can you increase sort of line items there?
Not in principle.
I don't think so, no.
You can't in
No.
the state of Maryland.
So, yeah, so you couldn't take money from one service and put it in another service if you had the restriction on the council can't increase the budget.
And if there was a line item that was not in the budget, the county could not add it in and provide the funds for it, except in Montgomery County.
That's right. And I have a line item veto of the budget the council passes, but to be honest, it's worthless because they pass the budget. They cut all their deals. They go back into their back room and cut their deals the night before they pass it, and they vote 9-zip to pass the budget. So if I line item veto one thing, they're just going to override me. So I don't think I vetoed some things, but not any. I don't think I did anything in the budget because it was pointless. In terms of the sheriff and police, I don't know if the sheriff has to submit the budget to the county now, and it gets folded into the full budget. But clearly, that's one way to exercise some control. I would caution you against trying to do too much at once. I mean, going to an executive form of government is a huge change. And to say we're going to do that, plus we're going to replace the sheriff's office, or we're going to create a new police department, might be asking the voters to do too much. And I think you would need to, I don't have the history here, but I assume people are satisfied with the level of service from the sheriff's department. I would think you would want to see it work with the executive for a period of time to see whether you need to make changes or how that might work. So, again, I think if you try to do too much, you're most likely going to wind up with the voters saying, wait a minute.
Yeah, I think it's more along the lines of building in the process, so if changes were ever needed, you could bring it to another referendum or something.
Yeah. Well, I think that could, clearly you could sort of flow and say, here's some other issue. We're just taking care of this particular, the form of government, and we're going to look at other issues perhaps down the road after we see how this works. So.
Okay,
But again, I'm a huge backer of executive government. And what I forgot to mention was one of the reasons I support it so much is you need one voice in Annapolis. Not that the senator and others don't do a tremendous job, but in terms of representing the county government and the people of the county, you need one person from the county sort of with that authority to go down there and represent that. And when I would go to Annapolis, people paid attention. When you've got one of 9 council members going down there, they don't pay attention. And frankly, the press, it's much easier to talk to one person from the press and get a statement than it is to talk to the president of the commission or the president of the county council and then have other council members or commissioners say, well, they don't speak for me and I disagree. There's just too much confusion there. I think it would help you all bring more dollars back here because I think people, my sense of it is that the legislature responds more to mayors and to executives than they do to commissioners and councils and all that, because you've got the authority of the whole jurisdiction behind you. And so you've got a cheerleader for your county, you've got a lot of different things rolled into this job. But I've always felt that it makes a big difference in Annapolis in terms of making sure that the interests of Charles County are heard. Anyway.
Okay. That was the short list. Now, there are undoubtedly some more detail that some of the board members may have with regard to those subjects or other subjects that we've neglected up until this point. So.
I'm curious, how large is Montgomery County?
1 million people.
Okay.
We were, I think when we changed to 9-member council, we were, I don't know, probably 750, something like that, 700, something like that. We've just grown
Tremendously.
quite a bit. Yeah, we are now the largest jurisdiction ever in the history of Maryland. Baltimore City peaked at 950,000. We have by far the largest school system. We will have, in 6 years, we'll have 160,000 students in schools. We're just sort of bursting at the seams in terms of school construction.
And at what number did you indicate you moved from 7 to 9?
I think it was, was that in 94 we did that, or 90? I'm not sure which one. But the big discussion was, and I actually agreed with this. It was how do we help not just elect minorities by creating the districts, but also, frankly, Republicans. And the idea was, we don't sort of create a Republican district, but the idea was with a smaller district, you can run much more cheaply, you can have a much more competitive race, you'll have more candidates and all that. And in 94, when I was first elected, 25% of the elected officials of the county were Republican. And when I left in 2006, 0. That's sort of how much the county changed during that time.
Now, when you say district, you mean representative district, right, where only the people in that district
That's right.
vote?
That's right. There's another way to do it, and this is the way we had it for a while, was you have to run for an office, and this is the way we do it now for our school board. To run for an office, you have to live in that district. but people vote countywide for you.
That's the way it is.
That's how we elect.
So, yeah, so you sort of require geographic distribution, but you're still voted on countywide. And we did that for a long time, and then we shifted to the 4 at-large and 5 districts. I do, speaking as someone who's run for office many times, it's very tough, very expensive, and the smaller, district you have, I think the more talent you can generate and let people try it out and see how they do.
The
And
smaller the, what do you?
yeah. Basically, instead of making people run countywide, if you allow them to
Having
run
just-
from a smaller district, it takes less money, it's easier to campaign, things like that. And I think you can help generate talent. I mean, some places use and I, started on the city council of Rockville, Mayor of Rockville, I sort of used that as my sort of small district to then run for countywide office.
Is Montgomery County unique in having that set up for their councilmen with a mix of at-large and district representatives?
I think there are others that have. I don't know if anybody else has where you get to vote for a majority. I think some of the county has 2 at-large and then like 5 districts or something like that. I don't know if you.
Prince George just has, I think, 2 at-large.
No, they don't. Prince George's got 9 districts.
They don't have it? I
No,
thought
they
they
don't.
had 2
They're
at-large.
talking about trying to get some at-large. That's one of the.
Okay.
That's one of the proposals, 2 at-large. I think there are some communities that have.
Yeah, you have Wycomico, Montgomery, Frederick.
Frederick just went executive,
Yeah.
so the next
Yeah.
election they'll elect the first
But
executive.
they have district and at large.
Okay.
One of the things that I've discussed, or I've had people discuss with me, is the idea of having the county council people being elected from their district, but elect the president of the council at large, so that you would have 1 at large. I gather, based on what you said, you don't really like that idea, but I'd like to...
No, it's been discussed in Montgomery County. The councils seem to like being able to rotate the presidency or the chairmanship, and let the council members sort of elect the chair and vice chair, and then they sort of keep it going. There's been some discussion, like in Washington D.C., where the chair of the city council is elected, runs at large, and is elected for that seat and serves 4 years in that seat. My worry about that was you would create, if you're worried about duplication of services, you would create a power base in the county council that would then start to see themselves as an alternate executive and then start to create that real duplication of service. And start
They don't have the authorities of the county executive, and one of the points I've heard supporting that is I've had a lot of people come to me and they're really afraid of the executive form of government. They're thinking it's giving one person too much authority. And so a system like this might provide a better check and balance.
Well, that's what, in Montgomery, that's what we were scared to death of too much power. We hate power in people's hands, so that's why it's a weak executive form of government. I did the best I could with it, but the council, they're the, unlike I guess in the U.S. Constitution, the president is they're the first, whatever. The council is first in the Montgomery County Charter. Then the executive comes up. The way they wrote the charter. So.
When you were talking about the one voice, one of the things we heard was, like in times of like emergency, one of the problems with the commissioner form of government is there is no one in charge. They all have the same, even the president is just kind of a titular kind of thing. They don't really have any more authority than anybody else, and so it makes things less efficient. Would you?
Well, I mean, we were down here right after the tornado. We had our firefighters here. I thought that at the time, the commissioners, I was very proud of the job they did and the fact that they sort of welcomed people and listened to people who would run things like this. Let's take the sniper shootings that we went through. I mean, if that happened here and you had the commissioners, that thing could have turned into a political free-for-all if we had 9 people sort of, saying they're in charge. That would have been a real problem for us, because with all the press there, I'm going to tell you stories about that. But anyway, that's a challenge. But you would have, what you should have is you should have an emergency operations center, emergency operations team, emergency operations manager, so that when you declare an emergency, everything goes to that person.
Who declares it?
Actually, trying to think if it's the CAO who declared it. It would be your county manager would declare it.
In Charles County, it's the president of the county commissioners. It's provided for in state law.
But in times of emergency, you need a clear chain of command. And sometimes it gets so confusing that people tend to forget what their roles are and all of that, so.
You just made the point that we need to have an emergency department, which of course we do. But that brings up the question of how deep should the charter go in identifying the departments of the government? Should the county executive have some authority to set up a department when he sees the need for it?
Yeah, I mean, the way it was, we set it up, and to be honest, I don't have a copy of our charter with us, and I don't remember what is, the finance officer sort of detailed in there that the council made sure that certain positions, county attorney, finance officer, finance director, sort of reported jointly. The executive appointed and whatever, but reported jointly to the council and to the executive to keep their sway. We set up a mechanism, again, I don't know, other than those two, I'm not sure what other departments are in the charter, but what we did was we set up a mechanism for the executive to propose changes in the departmental structure, and it was more advantageous when the only people the executive appointed were department heads. So they were creating a lot of departments. And, the law, I guess the charter says that the executive submits it. If the council doesn't, the council takes an up or down vote within so many days, and if they don't, then it comes in what the executive said, and it never worked that way. I mean, basically the council would negotiate with what the department's going to look like and who you're going to have and all that stuff. So, there was language in there that sort of made it look like you could move things quickly, but the council never gave up that authority. So. But there are ways to adjust the departments, to create new departments, to merge departments. I merged a lot of departments when I was there, and it all was reviewed and approved by the county council. And it all, we had to do a sales job to show them why this is important to do and what the benefits were. But I think that's good. I think you want to explain to someone, you want to be held accountable to someone as to what you're doing. So that's one way to sort of counteract this idea of we're going to have a king here.
You were county executive at a time when there was tremendous economic growth and development in Montgomery County. Can you speak to how you think having an executive or county executive at the head of a county certainly would help and or hinder the ability to drive economic activity in dealing with the business community?
Well, we did have a lot of economic activity, but I also led our county out of 2 recessions, so we had some downtimes too. And to answer your question, it all depends on who the executive is. Do they support economic growth or not? Do they think we've got too much growth? Should we just shut everything down? Should we take our permitting functions and use them to hinder growth, or should we have them sort of facilitate things and be very efficient? So it depends on who your executive is as to what will happen there. What I found was it was much easier for me to speak to potential businesses about locating the county, about growing in the county. And when we started bringing council members, they would start to contradict each other. And, when we go to the bond rating agencies, the council members would contradict each other. And you want to present a unified message. And you get too many of them, it didn't work. We did, I remember one time, early on, we brought in the entire council to meet with a business that was looking to build a new facility, and they could either build it next to their current facility in the county or build it anywhere in the country. And they wanted to hear that we would be supportive of their permanent requirements, and they could get the thing up and done in 6 months. And we sort of told the council, okay, here's what we need to say. And we brought them in. I held my breath, and they all said the right thing, and it all worked. And the building was up in 6 months, and this company became. Hughes Network Systems became one of our biggest boosters in the county in terms of economic growth. So it can work. It can hinder you. Clearly, very rarely would you have a situation where you've got the entire council there. I mean, usually, you would have whoever the sort of represents economic development, whatever, from the council, or the head of the council come and speak with you. And that's another thing for you to consider. Do you want committees on your council? Do you want their votes to be binding? Do you? We had a council of the whole for decades, for a long time. And then they decided, well, we're going to break it up and create a bunch of committees. So now you've got the president of the council, the vice president of the council, you've got all the committee chairs, 3 members each. So everybody's on 2 committees. And something can be voted down in committee, voted down 0 to 3. So everybody votes against it, and it still goes to the full council. And so it's not like Annapolis where if the committee kills it, it's dead. Thankfully, and because it's 3 people, thankfully in Montgomery, the full council's got a chance at it. And many times they've overridden a committee's recommendation. To me, that's duplication of effort because the county staff is in front of the council enormous amounts of time because they're in front of the committee, and then the same issue goes to the full council, and they're back there doing the same kind of show for them.
Now, is
and
that
they
a
get
product?
called over all the time to anyway.
Is that a product of having a larger committee?
No, the committees are small. They're 3 members. It's a product of saying
I'm sorry.
we're going to go from.
Larger council.
No, they did it before they went to 9 members. So they're saying they did it when they had 7 members. So they said we're going to go from the committee of the whole, where everything's sort of presented to all of us and we get to vote, to separate committees. So you've got separate hearings, separate meetings. That's when they really turned the county council job into a full-time job. Even though in the chart it was labeled a part-time job for years, and they finally got that removed recently. So, that's something you all need to consider of allowing committees or not.
Is that a structure that's set up in the charter, or is that a structure that the council set up in the kind of their own self-organization?
I don't remember if that was a charter amendment or not. I don't know. But I'm sure the charter gave them power to organize themselves as they saw fit. But don't hold me to that. I don't know about that. But that's clearly something to take a look at, and particularly if you've got 5 members. Again, I don't know what the membership would be, the number would be, but if you've got 5 members, do you really need committees? And to me, that is an enormous waste of time on people's parts because everything is done twice. And there's no point to it. Because again,
It has to go to the council.
it goes to the full council. 3 members can vote it down. So they wanted the committees, but they weren't going to give it the power to vote and make the final decision. So 3 members can vote against it, and it still goes to full council, and it can pass 6-3.
I'm curious, the salary of the county executive and also its council members, was that ever a concern or issue in Montgomery County?
Yes and no. It's I don't know what the exec said. It was probably 170,000, something like that. 60, 70,000.
170?
Something like that. 170,000, 160,000,
people.
somewhere around there. Yeah.
Okay.
The council probably gets about 100,000, 90 to 100. I don't know.
Okay.
I think they got raised. So every 4 years, there's a compensation committee that makes recommendations, and I think it's like you. I don't think we vote on it. They just make recommendations, and then that's sort of whatever they recommend is what becomes law. You're not allowed to change your compensation midterm and all that stuff. That's sort of standard stuff.
But your council people are full-time people. Is that correct?
Yes, they really should be. They really should be part-time. They've made themselves full-time. They're getting paid sort of full-time.
They're getting paid for full-time.
And there's a couple of them that have tried to, keep their law practice, keep whatever, and their fellow council members really sort of give them a hard time about it. That you need to be here all the time, holding meetings. So that's something to think about, with the.
Well, that's a
Full-time county executive running the county government. Do
$1
you need a board, which the council would become, to sort of oversee that? Do they need to be full-time and make work or not?
And insurance was included in that package as well?
Insurance.
Health insurance.
Yeah, all the benefits. Yeah, that's sort of on top of the salary, but all the benefits are included. Yeah, I always sort of said we should, the executive should get what a congressman makes, and and the council should get less. because they've made it so that you can clearly do this full time, and it's you sort of get a different kind of council member there. So.
Maryland does have a salary commission.
Yeah,
They meet
same
recommend-
thing. Yeah.
recommend the salaries.
I'm sorry. Do you believe the salary is a motivation of the caliber of individuals interested in the position?
We've had very qualified people run for executive. We've had good elections with good candidates. So it's, if you double the salary, would you increase the quality of candidates? I don't think so.
But what about
If you
council?
cut it in half, you would
That's a different
lose.
Yes, ask that one. She said, what about council?
Council, well, because you have to pay full-time because it's a full-time job now. I mean, that's sort of how
Well,
they
if you're full-time in
created that.
Montgomery County, I mean, there's a standard of living there.
Yeah. I mean, what we've seen,
$1,000 is not breaking the bank in
Montgomery
Montgomery County.
what we've seen a little bit of is people in the state legislature running for county council because they want the full-time salary. They don't, they can't live off their legislative salary, so they want to do that. Again, with the size of the county here, I'm not sure you would need full-time, and I don't know what the commissioners are paid, but
I think it's 40?
yeah. I mean, you certainly could arrange it so that, and we did put in our charter, they were part-time council members. And it's a full-time executive, can't have another job, full-time chief administrative officer. I mean, that's all a requirement, so.
If you could just expand a little bit. Earlier, you mentioned something about in Montgomery County, you have district as well as at-large council members. Can you just talk a little bit more about the benefits of that, again, because that's sort of an issue here.
The benefits that were seen from the people proposing this and from the public's point of view was you would make it easier for people to run for office, so you would have better competition, you'd be able to attract more talent with the district seats, that you would have to raise money to run in a county of 1 million people, or 500,000, whatever it was at the time. So that was one benefit. The feeling was you would get more diverse representation, both politically and ethnically, on the council, and we've seen some of that. And the other benefit was that you would have people really focused. You'd have one council member really focused on 1/5 of the county, on a particular part of the county, and could be your representative on the council. And then, from my point of view, the other benefit was for large. I get to vote for majority of the council. I've got people there who are going to look out for the good of the entire county versus just focusing on their district. And the arguments against it were, well, we've gone from 7 to 9, we're adding 2 new council members at their salary, plus their staff, plus whatever. Do we really need to do that? But the other argument won the day of sort of bringing more diversity to the council and bringing more representation.
And I think you mentioned, which is something I'm concerned about also, is that you tend to have more minority representation when you go district. You tend to, nationwide. But also, a minority could be not just racial or ethnic, but it could be a party.
Yes,
I mean,
yes,
I'm not
that's what we.
Yeah, I'm not a Republican, but I mean, I look at the last 2 elections. All Democrats have been elected.
I think that argument of making it easier for a Republican to get elected it played a large part in the decision to go to 5 districts in the county, because there are parts of the county that are at the time were more Republican than Democrat. Certainly the Bethesda Chevy Chase area, which had a Republican for years, now is a Democrat. And that just happened recently. And then the Up County had a Republican for some time, and now has had a Democrat for a few years.
Thank you.
Sure.
Mr. Duncan, you talked a little bit earlier about, as the weak executive and the desire, I think, as the charter is being written, to either diffuse power or to keep somebody around too much power, and certainly the largest power that a state or local government has is the power to tax. Are there any restrictions in the Montgomery County Charter on Montgomery County's ability to raise and impose taxes and fees, and are there any you think should be in the charter?
We pay a lot of them. There's forgive me for not remembering the full specifics, but I know there's at least one, maybe two, where the executive has no say in setting of a tax rate or of a tax. And again, I don't remember the exact details, but
That's not part of the budget process?
Well, the council sort of got authority on their own to do this. They created certain things, gave them the sole power to levy this tax. And I have a real problem with that. I mean, if I wanted to veto that, even for symbolic reasons, I wasn't allowed to. And I think you need that. You need the check and balance from both sides when you're levying taxes and making those kinds of decisions. And I know there's at least one tax in the county, in Montgomery County, where the council does it all themselves, and you really have, other than sending them a memo, you really have no say in it.
So if they want to impose a shopping bag, maybe they already do, but if they want to impose a tax on shopping bags, they can do that.
The executive proposed that.
But if the in Montgomery County, if the council proposed that, the county executive couldn't veto it?
That would have been legislation. I think the county executive could have vetoed it.
Okay.
But
Then
there's
they could have
something in the
overridden
legislation.
it.
Again, forgive me, I don't know if it's the energy tax or it's something that I had no input into. And they had, again, they'd passed some law giving themselves sort of sole power for that.
They just did the rain tax.
Yeah.
In Anne Arundel County, the council
Executive.
proposed the tax and the executive vetoed it.
Yeah.
And then the council overrode.
And this is sort of a personal philosophy, but you start nickel and diming people and doing all these little taxes, it drives people crazy, and it sort of misleads them as to what the full tax impact is and all that stuff. But the council is sort of looking for ways to, again, get more revenue to do whatever.
Put that $1 million back into the budget for next.
Well, I'll give you one. I had proposed a 6-year balanced budget. You can never do that, but basically looking at what your known expenditures are and your growth's going to be and all that, and say, okay, we need to track our expenses with our revenues over a 6-year period, just to give us an idea of where we're going. And I proposed this to the council. I took $25 million, set it aside, and said, this money is not part of a reserve. It's just going to be in a fund, and we're going to sit on it because we know in year 2 and year 3 we've got these schools opening, we've got this happening, so we're going to put the money, hold it for the second year and the third year. And the response back from the council was, if I didn't want them to spend the money, I wouldn't have put it in the budget. They spent all $25 million that year and kissed goodbye any 6-year balanced approach. I mean, it was very, and that's sort of the detriment of they can throw out your budget, do whatever they want. The good side of that is people can appeal to them, and they can, put things back in that the public wants. And the latest example we had of that, the last budget, the county executive took out some funding for high school construction, and the council put it back in and sort of restored the program to where it needed to be. So.
Okay, last call for questions.
I just have one real quick one. Doug, do you know whether you've got instituted in the charter any benchmarks or criteria as far as debt affordability levels and things like that?
No, not in the charter. We have a list of sort of guiding principles for our debt, but that's not in the charter. It's about 10 items that we check constantly. We give them to the rating agencies.
Right.
We sort of report on ourselves, but that's not part of the charter.
Now, who created that? Is that something that
came out of the
council approved of, or just an administrative thing?
It came out of the OMB, the Management Budget Office, and the Finance Department, in cooperation with the rating agencies, over time. I don't think the council ever voted on that. I mean, just sort of, it's an executive department saying, here's how we're going to sort of monitor ourselves, and the council knows that, looks for that sort of report and understands that. I don't think they ever sort of gave full approval to it.
Should they be in the charter?
Like a not to exceed.
I don't know. My worry is in an emergency, you've got to be able to respond, and you need some way to, if you have it, you need some way to override it in case, God forbid, whatever happens. I really think what you want to do in the charter is sort of set up the mechanisms for how you will address certain things, as opposed to saying, here's the strict and fast limit rule. It's here's how we're going to adapt to this over time, and here's what has to happen, and here's how the executive and the council make those changes and make those decisions. And I don't recall. Well, I take that back. We did have a charter amendment passed that's got a tax limitation on us. That was passed in the 1990 election, I think, something like that. And there still is an override. You basically need, I think you need like 9 members. You need the full council to vote to go beyond that. So one council member sort of has veto power over whether they do that or not. And that's a property tax limit. So there is some limit there. I just, again, I worry about limiting your flexibility, limiting your bond rating, and what you pay in interest and all that. It's the good bond rating agencies look with a lot of concern when you start doing that. So, although Prince George's has it, and they're now AAA too. So.
Just one last question for me. Can you speak a little bit about, it might be a little difficult because you guys have progressed from commissioner to manager, but one issue is the transition phase. We're going from code to this. Do you have any comments on the transition of it? I mean, even from if we have special elections, I mean, when should the county council, county executive be put in office or be put up for election for office or anything like that? I mean, if you don't have any thoughts.
Well, 4-year terms.
So
they should run just like they do now. They run with every state and local office except for the city of Baltimore.
So it'd be, if you voted in
Off
the
years.
charter, in the next election, it would be 4 years after
No,
that.
2 years.
I think that's the question. I think
Yeah.
that's the question. And that is, if the charter is approved, we could have a special election in a presidential year.
Or
It would be for 2-year term.
Okay.
Okay, and then
I
it would
would-
be in sync with everybody else.
I really wasn't involved in sort of the transition to that, but
Okay.
I would say a 4-year transition is too long.
okay.
That you would, if it's approved, you want to have the election for your elected officials 2 years later. I wouldn't do a special election. I'd do it as part of the next regularly scheduled election
Okay.
for a 2-year term and then go from there.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think if you wait 4 years to do it, it's,
You lose
Yeah.
all momentum and everything.
plus it leaves, a lot of people in limbo as to what's happening and all that stuff, so I think it's better to do it that way. But again, I didn't go through that. We approved our charter in 68 and elected the first executive in 70.
Okay.
So it was 2 years.
Okay. Any?
If I may ask one question, a lot of it is the budget, and the county executives, most county executives present the budget, and the council approves it. Is there a deadline in your charter when they have to approve it?
Yeah, and every sort of county is different. Ours is, we changed the charter to go to a 2-year CIP. So every 2 years, we have a full 6-year CIP, and then in the off year, it's basically just tweaking, sort of updates or whatever. That has to be submitted to the council by January 15th. The operating budget has to be submitted every year by March 15th. Some places it's March 30th, some places April 15th. And then they have to pass the budget. It must be June 1st because it's always that sort of the last week in May that everything gets wrapped up. So they've got to pass the budget a month before the new fiscal year starts. And I don't know, that's something you all need to think about in terms of the budget and all that. And I always used to be sort of jealous, I think, of Hartford County, or Baltimore County, one of them, who could submit April 15th, and the council's basically got a month to play around with it. But, it's, there it's very different, because they can't add to it. You give our council another month, they can add, do whatever they want, a lot of things happen, so.
Okay.
I
Thank you very much.
I got one question. Sorry.
I love this is great.
You mentioned something about the power-wise, the county executive have less power than the council members, and a lot of people are having issues with that. The issue that I heard is when we have a county executive, we're going to give so much power to one person and can, ruin things in the county. How would you address that?
Well, I would say, because the council has final say. The council approves legislation, they approve the budget. They're the real decision makers in the county. I always viewed my role as one of, my job is to promote ideas, to promote programs, to give the council things to react to say yes or no to, and then let them make the final decision. There are other executives who have felt they are the 10th council member, and their job is to sort of, let the council sort of come up with things, and they'll just implement them or do whatever the council says. I took a much more proactive approach. You do need to be careful, and in our charter, it specifically says that the council members cannot direct the work of any executive branch employee. Now, they do that, but when I came in office, my predecessor really was the 10th member of the council, and department heads were afraid to put their head up because they weren't sure who they were reporting to, and the council would cut their head off if they didn't like whatever. So I spent the first term basically trying to grab back executive authority from what had been let happen before me. And you point out the charter thing to them, and they're the rule of thumb was you can call any county employee you want. We prefer you not sort of call line people. Call the department head if you've got a question, if they can answer it over the phone. Great. If you need them to do research, if you need whatever, you call the CAO, and he will or she will sort of negotiate that with you. And we were very accommodating, worked with them very much. But there's got to be a clear line in the charter that the county employees work for the county executive, not the county council. You got to make that very clear.
How large is the administrative staff supporting your council?
I don't know. Each council member has, I think, 3 aides. I think they've got a full-time aide and maybe 2 full-time aides and 1 part-time.
Each council member?
Yeah, each council member.
What is your,
That's kind of hard for
what's
us
your
to-
budget? What is?
Our budget is, the total budget for everything is $4.2 billion.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. Your
The total budget for the entire county, including the schools, is $4.2 billion. And it's roughly 50% public schools and 50% Montgomery College, WSSC, Park and Planning, county government, all that. And then there's a council staff who serves the entire council. And I don't know how many, with however many committees they have, you got committee staff, then you got the council staff, they have a council staff director. So each individual council member has their staff members. And there's a council staff director who directs the entire staff council. There's also something they call the Office of Legislative Oversight, which is sort of their audits, kind of investigations. But we also added an inspector general. Over the last few years, I had argued that the Inspector General should follow the federal model and basically report to the executive. The council felt no, it needs to report to the county council. So they've got that. They have so that's separate from the Office of Legislative Oversight. It's, there's a lot going on there.
So now you have this problem with the fire department and all this overtime and who.
Yeah. That's all part of the executive branch. The council really.
And the retirement and,
Yeah, I mean, the council approves the collective bargaining agreements.
Yeah.
They approve wage increases, they approve retirement, whatever. They don't, they should do some, and I think they did with the fire overtime, or all the county overtime. They looked at that and made a report. It's up to the executive then to sort of respond to that. I like the idea of an inspector general. I'm not sure you need that with an Office of Legislative Oversight, but.
Seems like duplication.
And then we've got our Office of Management and Budget, which is doing sort of audits, and our Finance Department is doing internal audits. So, you need all that, all those checks going on. That's important. But, I found sometimes that some people sort of rush to, I don't say take credit, but to announce that they're doing some investigation when it's, the bulk of the work's already been done by somebody else.
Not just the local government.
Yeah, it's human nature.
I have just one comment for you. As a citizen of Maryland who was ducking and hiding from all white vans some years ago during the sniper, I want to thank you
Oh, you're very
for
kind.
the way
Thanks.
you conducted yourself and allayed some of the fears by the way you conducted yourself and the way the sheriff conducted himself. So I just want to say thank you
Chief
for
Moose, I thought, did a wonderful job. The FBI, the ATF, the whole team was great. A very difficult time. You're not really sure. I wasn't really sure, how much to. If you told me before that, I would have said no to Today's Show, CBS Morning, whatever, all these national news things. Much more than I said yes to. I would have said you're crazy. But you had to do your role in the team. Sometimes it called for you to be out there. Sometimes it called for you to just stay quiet.
Right, but that was one good part about having a
somebody in
single
charge,
one person,
executive.
right.
Yes.
Somebody in
Yes.
charge.
One
So that's
face.
a good example.
No, that was, as I said, it could have just skyrocketed out of control. And the thing I'm most proud of is I just felt my job was to try to calm people down, to make them feel better and safer. And I got so many comments from people. Every time we saw you or heard you, we just felt better. So I said,
still
great, that's what I'm
duck,
trying to do.
Okay.
Well, yeah, I'll tell you one last comment. 6 months after that ended, I still would have people come up to me, particularly people who lived where the sort of the center of it was. People come up to me and thank me, and then they would just burst into tears and sort of sobbing 6 months later. I mean, that's how much stress people had.
Oh, yeah.
So, it's really remarkable. Anyway, I love this. This has been wonderful. Thank you so much. I love
Thank you for coming
special
down.
local government. Sure.
Thank you.
Senator,
Have a safe trip back, Doug.
Yeah.
Why don't we take 5 minutes?
Okay.